to the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from pristineauction.com studios with your hosts, Jake Ciely, Chris Meany, and Joe Holka.
Welcome, Foot Clan! No Chris Meany this week. It is only myself and Joe Holka, so screw that Canadian guy. We're going to get things done this week without him, right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so he seems like he's always on the move, man. He was in Canada for a little bit. I mean, he's always in Canada. He was in Vegas for a little bit. Bails on us this week. I mean, maybe it's week 11. We were just talking about it. Like, this grind is real at this point. But Chris is doing all this fun stuff, man. Maybe we should get out there and do a little bit more things and like actually leave the house a little bit more.
I've told him before, he is the most traveling dude I know in the business. Like, he talks about how much his workload is crazy and everything. This is why, because he goes to Vegas and then he goes to Arizona for some golf thing, and then somebody else is getting married. I think he knows like 7,000 people, because every time I turn around, he's like, "Oh, this person's getting married. This person's getting married. This person's getting married." Like, stop
Popular
traveling,
guy,
dude.
man.
That's why you have no time.
Popular guy, man. He's just got to be in all these weddings. He's probably in all of them. He seems like he's that guy that's just like always the best man too. He's probably just like traveling around the world, like just doing his life.
No. I was going to go different. I agree with you in all the weddings. I think he's that second guy. Like, he's never the best man. He's always like the first groomsman, just because he's friends with so many people, but he only has like his one best friend, and that wedding already happened. Fair
enough. I mean, but realistically, he's the one that's doing a little better than us. I think, honestly, this point of the season, like, it's such a mental like game. Even in DFS, like, we have to keep getting better. It's week 11. We have a lot of time left. To lose money if we don't reel some things in. But a lot of times to kind of turn it around too if you've had kind of a rough start. So it's kind of like a fresh slate. We got like 10 more weeks of this now. I mean, obviously going to go right up through playoffs and stuff. So a halfway point for me.
Yeah, it's common, and if you're playing hockey, if you're doing anything. Also, if you want to read all the articles, I know Chris still has his. I have mine over the DFS Pass. You put in the code podcast, you get 10% off for the footballers over there. And I mean, we might as well just jump right into it. You talk about cash, and I think there's going to be two big names. So let's get right into it, because
Straight cash, homie.
That's what we want to talk about, is straight cash. So before we get to your guy,
you already know what I'm going to talk about? Come on.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's just such
I never bring him up first.
Never any show ever brought up. But before we get to Christian McCaffrey, Brian Hill, free square. Is it that? Do we really need to overthink this?
Probably not. And what stands out to me right away, in particular on DraftKings, is how tight the pricing is again. Last week, it was really tough to build lineups unless you found some value that you liked. So running back kind of opened up a little bit. We got the Damian Williams news last week late. But this week, it seems like it might be another week where we need to find at least one running back slot, as much as it pains me to say that, to pay down for a little bit of volume. So Brian Hill is the one that stands out to me. 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel. 18.9 touches is what I have him projected at right now, which seems relatively solid. He's someone that is active a little bit in the passing game. In college, he was someone that was kind of a bell cow back. So I think he can handle it. It is Carolina. We know we can run on Carolina, right? Worst team in the league at defending the run. They're definitely a lot stronger at defending running backs in the passing game. But at 4,800, the volume should be decent. And it's not that I'm like actively trying to jam in Brian Hill because I love him as a talent. It's just I think we're going to need that savings this week. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, mostly because the most rushing touchdowns given up this year, Panthers 14. It's ridiculous. That's how you beat them, as you just beat them on the ground. Although this is the week 2 with no James Bradbury. I mean, we'll get to wide receivers, but this is a sneaky feeling I have. Well, I'll save it when we get to wide receivers. But to your point, the thing about Brian Hill, and now for seasonal to tie it into this whole situation, my only concern with Brian Hill is, as you said, the passing game, mildly involved. If you're looking at Brian Hill as a talent, big guy, faster than you think, actually very similar. Right behind him is Quadri Olsen, who that's why I'm not worried that Olsen's going to take too much away from him, because they both fill a similar role. But I do think Kenyon Barner gets a little bit involved, and I don't think it's going to be anywhere near Devontae Freeman, because we have talked about that before and joked about that he essentially turned into James White this year. My only concern is this a more balanced offense? You talk about the touches. I feel like 90% of those touches are going to have to be running the ball. And if they go pass happy, if they fall behind, does he potentially come off the field for Barner? That's the only downside. But at this price, I think, again, I asked the question at the beginning, don't overthink it. I think that's kind of overthinking it. But I think that's the only downside to Brian Hill.
Yeah, I think we've had weeks where we've had these free squares, I guess, quote unquote, but these guys feel safer to me than Brian Hill. I don't know why. I have this weird feeling about Brian Hill. I don't think it's like by any means like some of the plays we've had that we're just not going to be involved at all in the passing game. But like some of the things that you're saying about your at least concerns if he comes off the field, like there's some unknown here that we really don't know. Like the matchup is really good on paper. You're probably trying to bring back someone on Atlanta because obviously Carolina is in a great spot on the other side of the ball as well. There's a couple wide receiver options that I think are interesting on the Atlanta side too that are at least relatively cheap now that Hooper looks like he's going to be out. So I don't even know. It sounds crazy like cash games. Yeah, Brian Hill probably makes sense just to totally get in some of these other guys that are more expensive that you're going to really want. But in tournaments, I think there's other ways you can go for some savings in this game if you wanted to get a little bit different. So that's kind of the key to the slate so far, at least at the beginning of the week. Like, what are you going to do with Brian Hill? So I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, so on the other side of the ball, look who's there. Christian McCaffrey. There you go. Look, I will say this. If you did, and it wasn't a huge savings, you brought up the point, but if you did pull off of him for Dalvin Cook last week, you might have done a lot better than some people, only because it wasn't a bad game for Christian McCaffrey, but those savings, especially if you did what I did and dropped way back and got and I'm not here to gloat. This is not what it's been because in our 3-man contest, I still finished last. I'm just saying there was an opportunity last week because the price had become so high and restrictive. But against Atlanta, I mean, where are you looking at this, Joe? Because you're the Christian McCaffrey guy. Are you coming off last week and saying, you know what, that's the worst case scenario and he's still kind of worth it? Or did what happened last week make you think, you know what, maybe there is a case to be made?
It's a slate by slate thing. So like last week, it was, it definitely made some sense if you liked your bill, if you're trying to get up to someone like Michael Thomas, like Godwin was a guy that we really liked that kind of hit his floor, even though he saw some decent usage. Like to get those guys in, it was really hard to play Christian McCaffrey. So a lot of people paid down for Saquon, got burned. Dalvin Cook, thankfully, was on Sunday Night Football, I believe, last week. So he wasn't on the main slate at least. So we didn't have to worry about that. I feel like every time Dalvin Cook's not on the main slate, he just goes completely nuts. And then we catch his Madison and all these Abdullah touches when he's on the main slate. So hopefully that doesn't happen again this week. But yeah, Christian McCaffrey at 10.5 again this week. Like, what price would he have to be at home against Atlanta? Like, if you take out that we are kind of trying to find value on this slate, what would he have to be for you to just take him completely off your board? I think he's still got to be in there, right? 30 points as a floor. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, I kind of think that's what you're looking at is the fact that, what was it, 29.1 or something? I was trying to pull it up on DraftKings last week. So if that's the worst case, but of course, you're going to look at it, it's a little bit about 2.5 times, almost 3 times value. And how much are you going to complain about 2.5, 3 times value? I think the only difference was, this is, so I'll ask you this more as a roster construction question, because the best lineup I had on DraftKings was around 200 points. I pulled off McCaffrey. Now it was down to Le'Veon Bell, who only had 16.8. But the difference is because I was able to smash at basically Lamar Jackson and then Tate, Kirk, who were both savings at the same time, but then have the wide receiver upside, have it with Lamar Jackson, have it at tight end. Basically, it got spread out everywhere else, and that was why I was able to hit. Where if I put that lineup together, Christian McCaffrey, I probably miss him. I do miss him Lamar Jackson by other spots. So I guess that's the bigger question here: is it that big of a it doesn't need to be a roster overhaul if you're not going to pay for Christian McCaffrey? Because I feel like if you're only doing it for 1 or 2 players, to kind of answer your question with a question. I feel like that's where the people make the mistakes. If you're overhauling the entire roster, yes, but if you're only making 2 swaps, it almost doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, that's the thing. Roster construction is going to be different every week, and you really need to try and walk through what are you giving up in order to get up to Christian McCaffrey at 10.5. Last week, there was, I guess, worse plays at running back, in my opinion, than we've had in quite some time. We had some question marks with Kamara and his usage. I mean, he still kind of caught his floor, caught 9 balls, I think, in that game. So these guys in the mid-range, like Chubb, Mack, Derrick Henry, these guys that go completely ham. So if you ended up on one of those guys instead of the Christian McCaffrey roster construction, obviously you did fine. I would, I guess, implore people to not get too caught up in this wide receiver upside that happens, because they're always going to have more of an upside than these running backs typically. And the floor is definitely much lower in my opinion. So last week, we had all these guys that did extremely well. Tyreek Hill, Michael Thomas, at the top end. like if you had one of those guys, you feel really good about it because your roster construction probably led you to someone in the mid range. And if you landed on Christian Kirk, like Yahtzee at that point, right? And we did have some options to pay down for at tight end as well. So like in a slate where like you can get in Christian McCaffrey and you still like some of the cheaper options, I still think that he's going to give you the best chance to hit that floor ceiling combo. Like again, Christian McCaffrey could have scored again in this game. Let's not forget he was stopped at the 1 yard line. Like maybe he was in, maybe he wasn't in. I think still people, if they're going to overthink this one against Atlanta, I think that I have no problem building around him again, unsurprisingly, I guess.
All right. So then who else are you looking at here? Because you know what? I'm going to throw one at you. You love to hate on this guy and I love to love on this guy, but there's an opportunity here. Like I didn't love him last week. Well, also there was a different slate, but the fact is no Matt Breida. Can I get you in on Tevin Coleman this time? Now can I get you with Tevin Coleman?
His price is pretty nice, man. 6,100. It is Arizona, all of that. I'm more in on Tevin Coleman now that we know Breida's out and whatnot. So I think that his price is at a spot where on this slate, like so in that range, you're looking at guys like Marlon Mack at 6,400, paying up a little bit for Josh Jacobs, maybe Devin Singletary in that range. I think Coleman is probably the top play out of all those guys. Their implied total almost at 29 points against Arizona. There's going to be a ton of plays. Again, he's not going to have that ceiling when it comes to his usage through the passing game, but I mean, I think the usage here should be good for that price. So I'm in on that. They're a pretty large home favorite. I think that that's one that we could lean on. Do you think that Tevin Coleman's going to be super popular in that range? Like, I think it's going to be hard to get to that mid range at running back, especially if we want to pay up for someone like Cook or McCaffrey and then some of these wide receiver plays as well. So like, I guess I haven't built a roster with Coleman yet. I guess I'll say that.
I'll say this. I'm legitimately shocked he's not, because Tevin Coleman's had a pretty decent ownership this year in general. And now with no Matt Breida, and what are they doing? They're facing the car. I'm shocked. He's inside the top 10 by one spot. I don't get it. Like there's a lot of names in front of him. And maybe to your point, I think part of it might be he's getting skewed by DraftKings versus FanDuel because his FanDuel pricing is a lot weaker at 6,700. I don't see how you don't plug him in for that. So maybe that's why when you combine both sites. But I mean, right immediately in front of him for 1,800 more is one of your favorite picks is Leonard Fournette because of volume. But you're going to tell me Leonard Fournette versus Tevin Coleman, they're both very similar in the fact that if you're going to give me 20 touches, we know the majority of them are going to be rushing, not even passing that much. Why would you? I don't get it. Why would you go Leonard Fournette against Indianapolis over Tevin Coleman against Arizona with an $1,800 savings?
Surprisingly, I'm with you here. Like Lenny's someone that I've had a lot of this year. Obviously, 7,900. I have a lot of pace concerns in this game. Like I don't see them just like coming out and slinging the ball around with Nick Foles in his first game back. Like both these teams play at an extremely slow pace. Like the team total is really low. They're on the road. Indy's been the second best team in the entire league at defending running backs in the passing game. So yeah, like this doesn't seem like the ceiling game for Fournette, which probably means this is the game where he gets 3 touchdowns finally. So I don't know. I think the volume should be there. I have no issues with Leonard Fournette at 7,900, but like you said, like that's a tougher price tag to get to on this slate when we do have some guys like for significantly cheaper for not much less of an expectation on the ground. Like Tevin Coleman, 4 targets in each of the last 2 games as well. Not as much work on the ground, but now that Breida's out, like I'm more in on Coleman than I've ever been. Are you happy?
Yeah, I am. I'm a little bit happy. I'm smiling inside and outside, as people can see. All right, here's a question for you. Here's one. I want to bring him up specifically on FanDuel. He is $100 cheaper than Tevin Coleman. And where is he? He's 5,500 on DraftKings. I'll give you a hint. The team got obliterated last week, and he still got 30 carries. Like
I've never seen anything like that. Have you seen anything like that before? They were getting just destroyed, and they just kept feeding him the ball. It made no sense.
So is he on our radar now? I mean, I kind of feel like you almost have to. If you're going to tell me 30, forget carries. If you're going to tell me 25 touches at that price, that would like if you said forget the team name. Let's just say, hey, you have a top 15 talent running back. He's getting 25 touches. End of story. You're putting him in your lineup when you're talking about a price of 5,500 and 6,600.
Man, I just mentally, like, it's so hard to like just plug in a running back that's a double digit road underdog. Like, I get that. Yeah, maybe he's going to be getting the touches. Like, the matchup's fine. Like, I mean, Oakland's been horrific at defending running backs in the passing game a decent amount. It's just like, I don't know if I can really, I guess, put some good hard-earned American dollars behind a Cincinnati running back right now. Like, you would have gotten there on volume last week, but I'm seeing a lot of red right now, just like looking at my spreadsheet. Like, I don't know. It's probably not for me, especially now that we have Brian Hill for significantly cheaper. That's probably going to be the route that I go.
Oh, you could get both of them.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I paid down for multiple running backs, I guess. Last week it probably would have worked unless you ended up on Montgomery. But yeah,
it better work this week.
It might. I mean, again, like, it's hard to build lineups. And this is like what happens kind of like towards the middle and end of the season too. Like, pricing gets so much more efficient. And like, we're going to be talking about some really cheap defenses, some really cheap tight ends, because there's no possible way to get to some of these wide receivers and running backs unless you pay down. And at quarterback too, like we might have to really dumpster dive for some of those. So it's an interesting week. So these guys are probably at least in play if you're rolling out a lot of lineups. But I guess Joe Mixon, there's a lot of wrinkles there that I would just tend to avoid typically.
Yeah, so I do have him on one site and not the other. So there's a little sneak preview for it. But on the other side of the ball, my boy, Josh Jacobs. I mean, he's kind of, I mean, that's not even, it's weird. He's not a pay down. He's not a pay up, but he's just amazing. Like, how Josh Jacobs, I don't get. I'm confused here. I'm also confused the fact that Josh Jacobs isn't even the number 1 or number 2 projected ownership, because the number 1 and number 2 is Brian Hill and your boy, Christian McCaffrey. I'm surprised Christian McCaffrey's still number 2.
I'm not. He's like the GOAT. You watched him at all this year?
Oh no, I've actually never. I haven't watched a single game.
He hasn't been. He hasn't been on Red Zone once. I don't think the entire season. No, man. Never. Josh Jacobs. I don't share the Josh Jacobs love that you do. I think that like he's like the type of guy that I struggle with, right? Like, he's very inconsistent in the passing game. Like, he's never going to see elite volume in the passing game. He saw 16 carries in the last game, but he just scores touchdowns and gets there somehow. So like, his price is probably still at a really decent spot. It is against Cincinnati. Like, he's probably going to get 24, 22 touches in this game. Like, not much through the air, but I don't know. Yeah, he's probably a good value. Like, him versus Leonard Fournette for 1K more. It's a little bit of a different conversation. I think that like, against Cincinnati in the spot, Josh Jacobs at 6,900 has to be. I have him projected as like probably the 3rd, 4th highest owned running back right now. Is that kind of in line with you, or is he lower than that?
That's the top 3. Like I said, is McCaffrey, Hill, and Jacobs. So there you go. Actually, right behind Jacobs is Dalvin Cook, who might as well bring up. I mean, I've got him on one side, but not on the other. Dalvin Cook is, I think, on FanDuel is really easy. You're getting a $1,900 savings to drop down to him from Christian McCaffrey. And I love Christian McCaffrey. We know you love Christian McCaffrey, but $1,900, you kind of almost have to, don't you?
Yeah, I like Dalvin Cook a lot. If it ends up bearing me again with the kind of other usage of these other random, like, not even just like Madison and Abdullah, but like this Irv Johnson, like these tight end like dump offs, like, it's like so tilting. But 154.8 total yards per game over the last 4. That's a pretty elite number as far as yards from scrimmage. In comparison, Christian McCaffrey all the way down at 129, so significantly less yardage that we're getting from Dalvin Cook. He seems like, and I heard someone else mention this earlier in the week, like Dalvin Cook to me is almost like the everything we want to see from Kamara, or what we remember from Kamara, is he's like bouncing off of all these touches or all these tackles and breaking these massive plays. So if you end up underweight on the game where he just goes completely nuclear with those bigger plays, like, you're really behind, especially if you're paying up at some of the other positions. So I love Dalvin Cook at 8,900 in comparison to some of the wide receivers that have been priced up a lot. I'd be shocked if I didn't have a significant share of Dalvin this week, even in not a great matchup against Denver, but they are at home.
Yeah, well, that's the one way you do beat Denver, is running the ball. So, and we've seen with no Adam Thielen on top of things. All right, so anybody else? Are you ready to move to wide receiver?
I think that's good for cash games. I think we covered most of the guys up top that I was looking at.
All right, so let's talk about. Actually, wait, that's about everybody. I was going to bring up Le'Veon Bell, but we're done with Le'Veon Bell at this point, aren't we?
Yeah,
we're done trying.
So. Definitely not in cash games for me. It's just like too much variance, I think, and just I don't know. I think that every time you play him, he just never feels great, right? I think there's other options.
It doesn't, and hey, you know what? We'll talk about the Redskins defense in a little bit, but yeah, wide receiver. Now, this is what I was saying. He's a great play in general. He's Julio Jones. there's one game every single year. This feels to me, hey, this is nothing more than just a gut feeling. And like this, sometimes your gut's right. And we watch football enough, we analyze football enough that sometimes there's maybe some subconscious reason behind me that I can't put my finger on. But with no James Bradberry, this just kind of feels like one of those 150-yard, 2-touchdown, 200 yards, 2-touch. This feels like the Julio Jones bananas game.
Julio, I have like such a love-hate relationship with this guy. Like I actually do. I mean, comparison, like the price for him right now in comparison to Michael Thomas is $9K on FanDuel. He's 9,900 on DraftKings. You get Julio Jones for 7,500 on DK, 78 on FanDuel. That's a huge amount of savings. I'm not sure that the upside is too much different. Like you said, like Julio has these just absolutely crazy games a couple times a year. I think you'll go broke chasing that just because if you pay up for those games where he doesn't get in the end zone, which seems to happen quite frequently for Julio. I think that I think he'll go, I don't know if he'll go under owned just because this game's going to be super popular. I prefer, I think, almost every other Atlanta piece just because they're cheaper, but that could just mean that Julio just buries me. And I have whether I have Ridley, Gage, like one of those guys, maybe Julio ends up being a little bit of leverage off of Hill as well. So I don't hate the call. I don't think he's a cash play by any means, but if we're just looking, really, you're playing Julio in cash this week?
100%. Because here's the thing: no Hooper and no Devontae Freeman. I really I think the Devontae Freeman thing is something that's going to be part of the factor here, and maybe Julio gets the treatment that he does. But by who? There's no Bradberry. And I'm not saying Bradberry could shut him down by himself, but Bradberry is an underrated corner that people don't realize. Who, if double teamed with the safety, somebody over the top, whatever the Panthers decided to do, they legitimately right now have nobody on this roster to stop him. I would love to get Michael Thomas because for that same reason, you look at the Buccaneers in that situation, they just got rid of Hargraves. Somebody else, MJ Stewart just got hurt. They have somebody who got hurt in practice yesterday, starting backups at corner. So of course, Thomas, but to your point, if you're going to tell me similar situation, similar players, similar talents, and yes, I would take every single time, I would take Thomas 10 times out of 10. But for this price difference, in this situation, I don't see how he doesn't get double-digit targets unless they somehow end up 14-0 in the first quarter, which, I mean, you could say that about a lot of wide receivers.
I mean, it's hard to really poke holes in Julio this week. I mean, he's third on the slate in yards per route run, something that I'm weighing pretty heavily. His weighted opportunity rating, he's top 5 in that. I don't know. The price seems so in comparison, John Brown, 6,400 on DraftKings. Julio's only 1,100. Go from John Brown to Julio. I don't know, man. I'm in on that. I'm warming to the idea. I guess I didn't realize how big the price difference was between him and Michael Thomas. That's going to be a big amount of money that can help you.
Not even that. Let's talk about, and it's not a huge gap, but Hopkins, both Bucs receivers, a Cooper. He's behind a lot of guys for being Julio Jones.
He just hasn't had the touchdowns this year, right? And that's there's a couple things. Year? Well, there's a couple of things that really drive the pricing, right? It's points that are scored and touchdowns are pretty heavy, but also ownership. And people don't click on Julio in comparison to some of these other guys as much because he hasn't had that explosion game yet. But yeah, I mean, it's coming. At some point it's going to happen this year, and it hasn't happened yet. So I hope he's in your I hope he's in your FanDuel lineup because you're making me rethink my team right now. So I'm in on Julio.
He is in both lineups. He is in both lineups.
You got me in on Julio and Coleman already.
Coleman?
This week is going to be an absolute disaster.
Hey, if it was DraftKings last week, no, it'd be absolutely amazing for you. So you should be happy. If it was FanDuel 2 weeks ago, you'd also be happy on FanDuel. So it just depends. Maybe I can get them both together this week. All right. So I gave my top one, my most favorite one. Who's your most favoritist?
My most favoritist ever wide receiver on the slate. Man, it's so tough because you want to say Michael Thomas. He's $9K. He's against Tampa Bay, massive pass funnel, everything that you would look at or care about at wide receivers. I won't even list them off because everything I care about, he's at least top 3 in all of these. And I think that there's going to be some narrative because they didn't even throw a touchdown pass last week. I think that people are getting smarter. They're just New Orleans failed last week. Time to jump back on New Orleans. So I actually like that they priced them where they did because I think it's a much tougher decision. If Michael Thomas was
that's what I mean.
But so that's the thing. I think if he was anywhere near these other guys, Michael Thomas would be 25% owned again. This now it makes it, you have to make the decision. So Michael Thomas is the guy that in theory that you really want to try and get to. But it's going to be tough. I don't know if I have a guy at the top end outside of those two, but if we move down a little bit, I think this is the DJ Moore game. 5,900 just seems way too cheap on the other side of that Atlanta side. I think he's one of my favorite plays in this game. I like the idea of the Carolina stack and then bringing it back with one piece of Atlanta. That's kind of what I'm on so far. But DJ Moore just seems like he's kind of primed to have that huge game at some point. Like, 5,900 top 10 weight opportunity against this team that can't defend short passes. Like, I'm really in on DJ Moore on DraftKings in particular at 5,900 on this game environment. Like, I think that's going to be by far the highest pace and just like most popular game probably on the slate, Atlanta and Carolina. So I think DJ Moore, if I had to like kind of plant my flag one spot for week 11, he'd be the guy.
He's number 2 projected ownership. You want to guess who number 1 is?
At wide receiver, it's got to be Michael Thomas, right? Are people? I guess yeah, it's got to be. People are just going to jam this guy in.
They're paying up for it. God, 99. Do you know what his price was last week? By the way, off the top of your head, on DraftKings,
I think it was like 8,200, something like that.
You're up by 100. It was 8,300. It jumped 1,600 in one week. This is just. I have never seen a wide receiver price. I don't remember the last time I've seen a wide receiver price gap that big between 1 and 2.
He's
and
almost when the number, 10K. He's a wide receiver. Are you kidding me?
And when number 2 is DeAndre Hopkins, it's not even like number 2 is like, hey, it's a 16 buy and a bad slate, and number 2 is like, I don't even know, Julian Edelman or something like that. Which, by the way, I'm bringing up because what about Julian Edelman? Let's talk Julian Edelman. Let's talk about Julian Edelman versus, I don't know, one of the most exploitable, weakest, awfulest secondaries in the league. And if there's anybody in this game, if there's anybody on this team, you know Edelman's getting his every single, like, he's the one guy. He's going to get his every week.
Yeah, his role is just so safe, right? At 7,600, like, he's priced right there by Julio, so it feels bad to pay up for Edelman at times. Like, he's a guy that I guess haven't really played a ton of over the last little while, just because he seems like he's always priced around this range, and then there's just higher ceiling options in that range if you do get up there. His yards per route run is significantly lower than some of these other guys we've talked about. But like you said, like against Philly, like this might be the spot where Julian Edelman ends up being the play, especially on DraftKings. So I got no issues with that. I guess like there's so many guys we're talking about, we're not gonna be able to play all these guys. There's no chance you're gonna be able to fit like these guys into lineups.
I'm playing all of them.
It sounds like you're paying down a running back. So we're gonna be on the opposite. One of us is gonna be rich. One of us is gonna be really poor after this.
Why does it have to buy? Can't we just both celebrate? Why you got to signal us out?
No, it's never going to be anywhere in between. There's no way. One of us is going to get buried.
It's the Will Fuller of the world. It's either you smash or you come up goose egg. All right. So where else are you looking at wide receiver? Because I got a few more, but I'm kind of interested. I kind of have led a little bit more than you have on that aspect.
I think that there's, if we're talking purely cash games, like those are the guys. I think if you're kind of on the train of we need to pay up, like we already talked about all those guys. Do you have any interest in Debo for San Francisco? I think that especially if we do end up getting Emmanuel Sanders out, I know we're still kind of waiting on that final news, but Debo is someone that I think has a lot of talent. Like he had his coming out partying a little bit. He's 4K. So like I'm trying to like find some guys at a cheaper range. I think Debo Samuel, I mentioned Gage before. He's under 4K on DraftKings as well. Like those are the guys that I think could be potential punts in cash games. But do you have anyone like on the cheaper side of things that you've been kind of leaning towards at wide receiver? I'm kind of struggling this week on the cheaper guys. Oh,
well, you're leaving one out, of course. Oh my God, revenge game. Jamison Crowder. No, but God. I mean, legitimately, Jamison Crowder is Julian Edelman. I mean, he is. He just plays for the Jets with Sam Darnold, which that could go up belly any given week. So I think if you're going down that far, I'll give you two. Since actually, you know what? I'll give you three. How about that? I'll give you Jamison Crowder. I like that. It has nothing to do with the revenge game. I would just like Jamison Crowder in this opportunity against this defense in general, period. And he's the only one that's been consistently targeted by Sam Darnold. The second one, we talk about consistent targets. I can't call it consistent because it's only one game. But Brandon Allen is at least going to throw Courtland Sutton the ball a lot. And for all intents and purposes, we've talked about Noah Fant before. We'll probably talk about him when we get to tight end. He's essentially their number two. So it's not even Deshaun Hamilton or Tim Patrick or whoever, because that's Brandon Allen is what he's doing so far. Apparently he hates Deshaun Hamilton, just like the coach, because he had one game with a bad drop, whatever. Can you tell him better on that one? And then the third, this one I really like the way that Dak Prescott's playing and the attention that Amari Cooper might get this week. Also, any given week, it just kind of feels like Amari Cooper, are you 100%? Are you ever 100%? But he's going to get the Slay treatment. And the number twos against Detroit this year, I just love the number twos. And if you're going to give me Michael Gallup at 6,700, and on FanDuel and DraftKings, he's down by 6,500. I know he gets a little bit of ding on DraftKings because of the volume, but I also feel like if you're talking about this price range, you're talking about the $6,000 guys. I really like number twos against Detroit.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hadn't considered him because he feels a little bit overpriced. But yeah, if they end up taking Amari away, maybe he ends up being a decent play in this game. Do you think Detroit's going to be able to keep up? On the other side, I think that this game could have some pace to it. I have some interest in Detroit and Dallas in that game. I'm just not really sure the exact direction that I want to go yet. I think that Crowder at 5,700, again, I just think he's a little bit overpriced as well. So the mid-range doesn't look great to me at wide receiver. At that point, I'm probably just going to jam in the Carolina guys, whether it's Curtis Samuel or DJ Moore. Those are the guys that I prefer in that range. Maybe Terry McLaurin at lower ownership, which I'm sure we'll talk about at the tournament side of things. But yeah, I don't hate Gallup. Gallup's a guy that I like his profile on most weeks anyway. It just seems like he's been priced up to a spot where he's a little bit out of reach for me. But Courtland Sutton's an interesting one at 6K. I think that of the guys you mentioned, he'd be my favorite. Third highest weighted opportunity on the slate. He is basically performing an absolute alpha this season, but just doesn't have much quarterback play behind him. That team total is so low. That's the thing that you'll probably get. Will lead you to significantly lower ownership for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's one guy on Denver outside of my boy Noah Fant. Courtland Sutton's fine.
All right, so then let me pull back and go to two different things. Back to your Deebo Samuel question. So there's two, and I want to bring up somebody we didn't talk about. And I know he's not cash, but I guess I'll save it for tournament. I'm going to ask you about Kenyon Drake tournament sneak preview. Spoiler alert.
Oh God.
To go back to Deebo. I'll ask you this because this is kind of Chris isn't here to do the argument, so you might have to do the argument because he's the one that always says if it's chalk, it's not always a bad thing. I find myself kind of talking myself out of Deebo, and if people follow me, and I'm not saying this to be, I told you so. I'm saying this because it's coming from a fan. I'm one of the biggest fans of Deebo Samuel. In my pre-draft write-up, I said, I love everything about the guy. You could go back and look. I said, I love everything about the guy except for the fact that I asked him a question at the combine, and he said, I don't know. That's a good question. How do you say, I don't know? Just come up with something. You know what the question I asked him? I said, what's his most underrated?
It makes me like him even more.
I said, what's his most underrated skill? And he said, I don't know. So
didn't have an answer.
Yeah, wow. Didn't have an answer. So I say that, but I feel as the number one, asked to be the number one on a team that, I guess, against the Cardinals last time, they didn't go run heavy, but this is a run heavy team, which I just kind of feel myself talking out of Deebo Samuel.
God, man, I think for me, it's just the price though. He's 4K. He's so cheap in comparison to what we need on this slate is someone that's super solid down there. And he seems like the guy that makes the most sense based on the matchup and all of that. So I like Deebo quite a bit. I think you're barking up the wrong tree if you want me to try and play the side of let's just play the highest owned wide receiver on the slate because he's a lock. That's not how I play DFS. If you guys, the weeks where I've had or I've struggled this year is just talking myself out of some of the best plays at wide receiver. But if it was to go the other way in a tournament, I do think that there's value in fading some of these wide receivers that have a larger range of outcomes and do kind of get up there in ownership. So what's Deebo at right now as far as his projected ownership? I didn't expect him to be super popular, but I guess it does make sense.
So not surprisingly, Deebo Samuel is third, right behind Michael Thomas and DJ Moore. So I feel like if we get the official,
they're onto us.
Yeah, if you get the official Emmanuel Sanders is out, he might be number one.
Yeah, I could see it. That's kind of probably what people are waiting for because, again, there's just not a lot of enticing value on the slate.
So I want to ask you about number 4. You didn't bring him up. We didn't really touch on it too much, but it is that same game we talked about before with the Saints. And that's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We've been playing this game the entire year. Oh my God, which one do I pick? If somebody tweeted this out, I wish I would have been able. It just went by my feed and I saw it while I was working. And then I couldn't find, I don't know, because it wasn't somebody I followed. Somebody retweeted it into my timeline, so I couldn't find it after that because I didn't remember who retweeted it. But anyway, it was about the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin situation. So here's what I'm going to tell you what the tweet said. And now you tell me how you feel about both of them this week. When behind Mike Evans, more targets, more air yards. When they're up, less air yards, more targets, Chris Godwin. So now,
interesting.
This game, does that make you feel like Mike Evans because they should essentially be behind?
I don't know. I guess it's like you basically. I'm not kidding. I don't have a strong feel for these guys. Like I don't think anyone does. If anyone's telling you that they know exactly when it's the Mike Evans game and exactly when it's the Godwin game, I'm sure they're broke, because like it's really hard to do to really pick between the two. So that it has me like at least nervous to play either of them right now, because again, we have these other guys like Julio at the same range. Like I think I would prefer the safety with going to something like that, because it hasn't been just like one guy gets there and the other guy has like a pretty decent game. Like even I guess last week, like Godwin still got his like 13, 14 points on DraftKings, but like it's been like one guy goes off, the other guy does nothing. And that scares me for these price tags. I don't know. I think that like what you said makes sense, but Mike Evans is always the guy that I have the hardest time clicking, just because he's the higher ADOT guy. Like New Orleans is a team that they've been pretty decent against the pass this year. Like they do pressure. So anytime a team's going to pressure a lot, it has me a little bit more nervous about the guy that's going to be running down the field a little bit further. So I think if gun to my head, it's still Godwin for me, but that's just going to come off as like the safest answer ever. But that's how I feel.
Yeah. The funny thing is their prices dropped on both sites, and Evans' price dropped twice as much on both sides, surprisingly enough. Godwin's dropped by 100, Evans dropped by 2, and then on FanDuel dropped by 2, and then Evans dropped by 4. It's like the same thing on both.
The Arizona effect, I guess. That'll do it.
I guess so. All right, so because you asked me my cheap guys, you brought up Deebo Samuel. Is there anybody else that we haven't brought up that you're kind of looking at? Or would you mess around with anybody from Jacksonville with Nick Foles back?
Yeah, like I said, I'm a little bit nervous about the pace in that game, and just like I don't see them coming out with Foles and just like slinging the ball around. I get like both these teams like want to slow it down ideally and kind of establish the run a little bit. So yeah, I'm not. I think all those guys, like there is a potential ceiling for all of them. I just think good luck trying to choose. 6,200 is a lot for a guy in a high or a lower volume offense. But I mean, one thing about Foles, he's not scared to throw downfield. So I think all these guys are probably okay in tournaments, but if we're just talking cash games, I don't think they're in play. On the value side, for me, I think it's Gage and Deebo as of now.
What about John Brown? I mean, briefly touched on
6,400. Yeah, no, I mean, the matchup's great, right? Against Miami, 6,400 is an aggressive price tag.
I don't want to interrupt you on this, but
I want to hear your take on it.
You said something. I'm going to ask you a question. Is it? The Miami Dolphins defense the last 2 weeks has played surprisingly well. Now, it's not the Steelers, it's not the Patriots, it's not a shutdown, but is it as good as we think it is, or is this just like a 2-week run potentially by the Dolphins? Yeah,
I think anytime you're trying to look at a really small sample of a defense is playing well over the last couple of weeks, it can get you into trouble. We have a much larger sample of them being terrible. So, I think 6,400 for John Brown, like this is a team that you can beat deep. I like that. I have more concerns about Josh Allen than John Brown, but I mean, he's like right there. Like if you're kind of trying to choose between John Brown and Courtland Sutton, I think it's probably John Brown for me in that price range. I don't know if I'll get there, because at that point, probably just paying down for DJ Moore for about 500 less on DraftKings. That's basically the same price on FanDuel. He's 5,900, John Brown. Yeah. So I think on FanDuel he makes way more sense to me. But that's a really cheap price tag for John Brown against Miami on FanDuel. So I might be in on that one.
All right, let me throw a couple quick names and we'll get to tight ends and quarterbacks. Didn't bring these guys up, even though it's cash. Your boy, the other Brown, the Marquise Brown. Snaps slightly go up, still not quite to where we want. I mean, it's 50%, less than 50%. I mean, I see you kind of, I feel like, is he still tournament only?
I think he is. Yeah. It just, his price, like against Houston, now it makes some sense, but they're a team that defends a deep pass very well. So yeah, I mean, yards per route run, Marquise Brown is just smashing. He's like not playing as many snaps as we would like, but like he seems like a guy that's still going to carry like
7,
like 4.7 really over the last 4 games. That's real. That's extremely high for anyone listening. Like that's very high.
Like the bet. For anybody listening, so you don't have to go looking. You might not even have access because that's usually a premium stat out there. But the good, like the really good ones, are usually like 2.3, 2.4, and let alone to get it like to 3, to get to 4. I mean, that's insane. That's a crazy number.
Yeah, so like Michael Thomas 2.8, Julio Jones 3.1, John Brown 2.3. So like these guys that are over like you said, like 2.3 or higher. And a lot of times it's some smaller sample guys in there, but it's like all the elite wide receivers in the NFL. And Marquise Brown is sitting at 4.7.
That's a ridiculous number. I can't get over it.
Yeah, it's nuts.
All right.
Yeah, so that's pretty crazy.
All right. One more name to throw at you. AJ Brown's not back. Tyler Boyd in this matchup.
Yeah, AJ Green. You mean? I think that.
What did I say? AJ Brown. He's on a bye. He's not back this week either.
Yeah, no, I think Boyd is fine. Like, he still feels like just such a floor play to me in this offense. Like, if you watch that game and you just see them just establish the run, like, it's really hard to pull the trigger on these guys. I think Auden Tate is still at least somewhat interesting. He's 4,200, so like talking about from a value perspective, I think Auden Tate makes some sense. Yeah, in a tournament, I don't think any of these guys are cash plays.
All right, so tight ends. Here we go. No George Kittle. Boom, off the list. It's kind of after that, because so I'm going to ask you about the two bigger names right behind them. It's the two. Well, Austin Hooper's off the list too. So there's only two names really left at the big top. And yes, I am ignoring Zach Ertz because he doesn't deserve to be in this group anymore. The only two left are Mark Andrews and Darren Waller. So here's two questions for you, Joe, for different reasons for these guys. Darren Waller has been quiet over the past couple games. Hunter Renfro's actually been their best receiver, including Darren Waller, including Tyrell Williams. So how do you feel about Darren Waller against Cincinnati? The other one, Mark Andrews, rebound week, smash week. Surprisingly, I looked this up, and this is in the APA column, and it'll probably be a mention over on the site as well with the footballers, is the Houston Texans defense has been pretty dang strong as tight ends this year. So do you pay up for either?
I love the Waller call at 5,500. He's like kind of gotten back to that spot where he seems like he's a decent reasonable price point. Like 6,700 on FanDuel might be tougher to get to, but on DraftKings, I think he makes some sense. His weighted opportunity has dropped a ton. Like you said, like it's been kind of a little bit of the Hunter Renfrow show, which is interesting. But against Cincinnati's second worst team in the league at defending tight ends, like behind Arizona, like it's the tails that we're targeting in these matchups, and the tight end position is so touchdown driven that I think that Waller is great as far as like if you're going to get up there. I prefer him to Mark Andrews. One thing about Mark Andrews too, and we do this show earlier the week, but if you're listening to your content wherever you get it, reading a bunch of things about, and everyone is saying the same thing. So like last week it was Mark Andrews is like, he's not running enough routes, can't play this guy. That's the time you take a chance on a guy that we know is talented, that is going to see a target share, that like you'll get him at way lower ownership than he should be in a great spot. So like Mark Andrews was a phenomenal tournament play by the end of last week. Now people might chase that a little bit. So maybe if you missed it, maybe it's not the time just to kind of lock him in. Houston's been pretty good against tight ends, so on the other side of that spectrum. So I think if you're paying up, it's Darren Waller. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think if you are, but where I'm looking, and what call me a sucker if you will. I mean, I'm 100% saying it. I know this can bite me in the butt a ton, especially because the matchup isn't that great. But I'm looking at tight end. I'm not touching Zach Ertz. It was funny. I actually wrote up about Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and said, you might want to stay away from both if Alshon Jeffrey's out, because now you're just going to get additional attention. I'm okay with Goedert if Jeffrey's out there, but I looked it up too, and somebody was like, "Oh, I think they're both sneaky plays. One of them's going to hit." Well, first of all, if you say one of them's going to hit, you can't come with that nonsense. You got to pick the one. Second of all, have you seen what the Patriots have done to tight ends this year? Do you know how many guys have gotten over 40 yards? One. Do you know how many guys have scored? Two. Do you know how many guys have scored double-digit points? I think it's one, maybe two, maybe in that other touchdown game. It's been domination against tight ends. I'm not touching either one of them. So that's what I'm saying. I think go there. Again, maybe Goddard if Alshon Jeffrey actually plays. It's the reverse for that situation. I'm not touching Jared Cook because I hate the guy. I will never touch him anywhere, no matter what. It's the other side of this. Bruce Arians finally gave O.J. Howard 90% of the snaps on the field, more than wide receivers, running routes 60% of the time, over 60% of the time. He finally gave him the use. Now, I know it's risky because, similar to your argument about the Dolphins, this is only one game versus an entire season of misuse of O.J. Howard, and it's not a great matchup against the Saints. But for the price, I find myself hard not to buy into O.J. Howard.
Yeah, another guy that I've probably talked myself out of too much, at least in recent weeks. But reason. Yeah, I mean his price. Yeah, I mean his price is. I mean it's still. I mean he's in a decent area where like if you're going to take a flyer on a guy, you might as well take a flyer on a guy that you think is is pretty talented. I mean, I was even going to bring this up, but I think it's a funny story. Someone I was chatting with earlier this week was talking about how Jameis used to have issues with his eyes, right? So he was actually in college. I'm sure he's got contacts and stuff now, but he used to just like kind of like target these big receivers that he sees down the field, and maybe he just thinks that OJ Howard is Mike Evans at times this year, and that's why he's been getting more targets. So I think there's something to be said for just these big athletes that they have on their offense, and Howard, I think, I mean, if you wanted to kind of go back to that, I don't think it's completely terrible. You just have to know that the floor is pretty low, but at 3,600, I mean, he's still a guy that's got to be in play. He's not running near the amount of routes that some of these other guys are, but an uptick in kind of his role, that's something you got to pay attention to at the position for sure, when this is a tough position to peg.
Yeah, and the thing is I'm pivoting off from Jack Doyle, who I like a lot, but Eric Ebron's still involved. Eric Ebron had a ton of targets last week, but he Ebroned him, of course, because he's Eric Ebron. So anybody else? I mean, we could bring.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned my guy yet.
Hawkinson?
Not Hawkinson, not Noah Fant. What do you think about Greg Olsen this week? 3,900. I guess I
thought you were about to say Mike Gesicki. I was like, come on, buddy.
Oh God. R.I.P. My Gesicki lineups last week. I actually don't think it's terrible to go back to him. Maybe we'll bring him up in tournaments. But Greg Olsen, massive total. I guess like trying to get as much Carolina this week is kind of what I'm on at this point. He just seems too cheap for a guy that's leading the slate in routes run over the last 4 games. 139 routes. I think that he's at a spot where his usage has been there. It was kind of only a matter of time before he popped off for a decent game, but his price hasn't moved a ton. So I think that he's still a guy that, again, like if you're just trying to stack up this game, like add Greg Olsen to your stack and kind of move on, and it allows you to upgrade a little bit at some other positions.
Well, let me ask you a question. Am I getting last week Greg Olsen and first 3 weeks Greg Olsen, or am I getting the Greg Olsen that was in between, who was still getting the opportunities but not catching anything? Which Greg Olsen am I getting?
You're getting one or the other, so there's not going to be much. It's not going to be much in between.
No, I like the call. Especially,
fair
he's
point.
200 cheaper on FanDuel, but I think isn't he? He's that same 3,000 range, isn't he, on DraftKings? Yeah, he's 3,900.
Yeah.
So there's the question, though. He's cheaper on FanDuel, but he's more expensive than OJ Howard on DraftKings. Do you still take him over OJ Howard?
I think so. I just prefer the game environment in that spot. At Tampa Bay, just there's so many mouths to feed there, and I don't know. To me, I think the safety is really important to me at a position where it's just so hard to grab, like just the targets in general. So I'm just going to skew towards the bigger total with the guy that has a bigger role.
All right, quarterbacks. You going to try and smash in Lamar Jackson somewhere?
It worked for the people that did it last week. It's just like, where are you finding the salary to play Lamar Jackson?
I couldn't this week. I did last week, but even going cheap at running back, I still couldn't find it this week.
Yeah, like I don't know. It just like he's a great play. There's nothing like if you're playing season long, like you're so happy you have Lamar Jackson. And again, like we talked about him, like when he was a lot cheaper, like at the entire beginning of the season, when he was like in the mid 6Ks. 7,700 for him. Like I get it. You're getting kind of like a running back at the same time too, like half the equity of a running back play. So like, I have no issues with it. It's just, and I think this Houston-Baltimore game, like what do you think about the ownership in Houston and Baltimore? Because I think we've talked a lot about this Carolina game. I'm interested. I think if this Baltimore and Houston game isn't going to be as popular though, I don't know. It's kind of hard. It's a good game to watch.
At quarterback, Lamar Jackson's 4th. Deshaun Watson is 7th, which makes me kind of say, Deshaun Watson, maybe. Like that's, we're talking quarterback. When we jump over to the wide receiver, go back to that. We mentioned DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre Hopkins where is DeAndre Hopkins? Holy crap on a stick here. What the heck?
Pretty far down.
Yes. Whoa.
Interesting.
DeAndre Hopkins ownership. I will tell you, he is outside the top 20 right now in ownership. Even with
that's surprising.
Yeah, especially with Michael Thomas being number 1 right now. The guys he's alongside of, Marvin Jones, Hunter Renfrow, Cortland Sutton, and Kenny Golladay. There is your potential tournament smash spot, Hopkins, Watson, if you can do it.
Yeah, that's one that I wouldn't have thought would have been that low on. But if people no one wants to still this Baltimore defense, people avoid it no matter what. So I think if that's a spot where we're going to get significantly lower ownership in tournaments, makes some sense. I don't think any of those guys are cash options. Yeah, what have you been doing with the tight end situation there? It's something that I've been kind of avoiding. Yeah, you can't pull the trigger on it, but it's
no. But if you want the trio up that stack, he's 3,800 and 5,100. For the ownership percent, like I think there's still better plays to answer your question.
For sure. Yeah, I don't hate it though. I think that those guys at the top are interesting. Like anytime you get a Hopkins at really low ownership, and we're talking about all of the other guys on the slate in his range,
well,
that's
you know what else you could do? You could plug in Will Fuller if he's active too. All three of them.
Is he going to be back? What do we know about Will Fuller? Because I got to change my lineup.
He's still 50-50 as of right now. Oh, you got to change your lineup.
Do I roll the dice in our 3-man? Just get Will Fuller back in there.
Can you put Will Fuller at all 3 wide receiver spots? Is that possible?
I would win all the money if that was the case.
Quarterback. Here's one I'll give you, and this is like a sneak. Like I don't mind telling you this. He's in my quarterback on almost every single one of my lineups, and he's in the top 5. But I don't mind it. I'm going Dak Prescott. Like I understand he had those 2 down games, but if you look at his play for the majority of the season, if you're not getting up to Lamar Jackson, and then for the price, I just brought it up and you talk about it, he's still just $100 cheaper than Deshaun Watson, but I like him more in cash than I like Deshaun Watson, but I will go Deshaun Watson in tournaments over Dak Prescott because of the $100 price difference.
Yeah, I mean, I have no issues with Dak. He's someone that, like this year in particular, has been throwing deeper, which I really like. Pretty decent total even on the road. Do you get nervous about these? I don't know. I guess I can't get too nervous about it. If Stafford doesn't play, like, do you think there's going to be enough back and forth to really have Dak hit value? And you mentioned that Amari's probably going to get the Slay treatment. So, like, who would you pair with them as well?
Gallup.
I guess that's my problem.
Dak Gallup all day long, get the savings and get the piece. And I actually am not that concerned because Jeff Driscoll is just Josh Allen.
Oh, I actually like Jeff Driscoll quite a bit, actually.
So
I'm not even trying to downplay.
You know who the most popular quarterback is? It's not Jeff Driscoll. Should be obvious.
It's got to be Kyle Allen.
By a wide margin.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, he's a great play. And we've talked about everyone on his team. Like, the quarterback at that point has to be at least in play.
Yeah,
right?
We're bringing them all up. I mean, you kind of have to. Anybody else?
I think he's popular because of the savings too, though, right? Because Kyle Allen's 4,700 on DraftKings. That does a lot. Sorry, that's Brandon Allen. 5,300, still a really nice price tag for him. So I think that's probably
not as nice at Jeff Driscoll at 4,600.
I'm kind of in on Jeff Driscoll, actually. This guy runs a bit. Like,
that's what I'm saying. He's Josh Allen.
The matchup against Dallas, like high tempo. Like I'm interested in him. Like I saw him projected for like 18 or so rushing yards. Like he's kind of like the little bit of the Ryan Fitzpatrick type play, to where, like, if it goes terribly wrong, like, you're going to look really dumb. But like last week, even like in a game where he only threw 1 touchdown, he still got like almost 20
to your
points.
point about Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm going to bring up something that D'Angelo Williams said on the show that I do with him is when you're the backup quarterback, you don't care because you're playing with house money. So to your point, even if it goes belly up, you could just be the Blake Bortles, like, he's just going to keep throwing it. He's not going to stop. He's not going to be like,
he's got good weapons, man.
Yeah. Jeff Driscoll.
I think that's part of it too.
Slate breaker.
There's the weapons that you have there, like they're not going to, I mean, they can help him not fail, I guess is what you're saying. And so I think that, like, am I going anywhere near Galladay, Marvin Jones, those guys? Like, probably not. But I think that Driscoll at 4,600 just opens up so much on the slate. Like, he's so much cheaper than any of these other guys we've talked about at the position. Even last week, he was
Galladay, Holkinson stack. Do it.
Yeah. Changing my lineup again. Now I got to get Driscoll in. Thanks for doing that.
Defenses.
People are going to have no idea what my lineup is now, though, because I've said that.
Well, no, that's why we do it at the end of the show. So. By the way, Chris isn't here, and I finally remembered to do defenses before the end. There you go, Chris.
Yeah. I think he reminds you of it, like every single
do you want
to
without even looking? Well, you can't look at it because I'm looking at it, and you're looking at all your spreadsheets. Do you want to guess who the projected highest owned defense is?
Oh, let's see. San Francisco's got to be up there. I'm going to say San Francisco.
San Francisco's way down. People are legitimately scared of the Arizona Cardinals now.
That makes no sense to me. I don't know. I guess I'm stumped on that one. I was going to say I was actually pretty locked into them for higher ownership. Are people just going to jam in the Patriots for 5K? No one's got salary.
Nobody's
for that.
Got the Patriots. Patriots are actually higher. They are higher owned than the 49ers as of right now.
That's crazy. No, I'm stumped.
The Oakland Raiders. Again, really? Oakland Raiders.
Against Cincy. Yeah, people just think Cincy's terrible.
But so you just said it.
They don't pressure.
You just said it. They think. And this is also one of the things where, are we overrating a defense on matchup? This is the reverse of the Tyler Eifert against the Arizona Cardinals. It's like, how far do you take a matchup where the Oakland Raiders aren't among the top 5, even they're not at the high adjusted sack rate? Yes, the offensive line is miserable, but as we just saw at the same time, like, they might just run the ball 7,000 times.
Yeah, like the Raiders are like never a team that I'm really on because they don't pressure at all. They're like, Sports Info Solutions, they have some awesome pressure data over there as well. They're just like always either middle of the pack or below average in pressure rate. Like these games, like, I don't know. I think that, yeah, if you're just targeting a really poor offensive line, that makes some sense. I don't know. I'm not so much on that train this week, though. I don't really love a ton of
adjusted sack rate.
Yikes. Yeah. So that's just not a play that I really ever make. What do you think about Washington on like the cheaper side of things? They've got to be pretty popular too, right? Against the Jets.
They're not popular enough. So I'm happy with that. They're like eighth, and at defense, it was just similar to the quarterback. It's relatively flat usually. I'm in on that because it's Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold might see ghosts any given week, as we know. And we continue to joke about it, but listen, even if he doesn't, he's turnover prone. I mean, this is the Josh Allen, although the bigger thing here is, Josh Allen can run and run for himself. Sam Darnold doesn't run that much, and he still has the same issues of potentially. He's Jameis Winston without the 400-yard games. Sam Darnold's like the perfect one to go against.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think that anytime you can target that guy, it makes a ton of sense from trying to pick your defense.
You know who Sam Darnold is?
So I'm in on that.
It's going to be like that. You remember the Scooby-Doo and they rip off the mask and they're like, oh, it was groundskeeper Willie the whole time, or whoever it is. I know that's from Simpsons, but anyway, they're going to rip off the mask and be like, oh, look, Eli Manning's still in New York. He's just on this team.
That is completely absurd, but I love it.
It's true, though. Tell me this. If you found out today Eli Manning had been playing the entire season for the Jets, you'd be like, well, that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I guess
exactly.
I can see that. He just takes his mask off. Oh, God. Yeah, no one would be surprised, I think.
You roll out. Here's what I think is the funniest one of all of them. The Miami Dolphins defense is the third highest ownership.
Good Lord, that makes sense. I mean, what's their price though? Because I mean, is
25 and 36? No, they're not. That's not even to answer your question before you even ask it. That's not. The min is 1,500 for Arizona against San Francisco.
I mean, I like that play considerably more than paying
an extra
2,500 for Miami. Yeah. I mean, Arizona, at least we know they're going to pressure. I mean, at that point, like they're a team that, like, again, let's not forget, like they played San Francisco pretty well last time these two teams played. Like there is some injuries for San Francisco. I have no issues actually with paying all the way down for Arizona at 1,500. Like this is a slate where that can go a long way. And I think we've mentioned that probably 100 times on this podcast, but you guys will understand as soon as when you start building lineups that you just can't make these teams that you're picturing in your head right now. So that's a spot where
and do you know what defense is $600 cheaper that I would still risk just at this? I know there's no, but I'm just $600 cheaper. I just roll out the Bengals against the Raiders. I'm not touching a defense for just because I don't know. I don't understand. I wish we had somebody to come on the show and be like, this is why I'm playing the Dolphins.
I don't understand that ownership. Like there was a couple last week too where I was just like, that makes no sense to me. But that's one that's a
don't fall into that trap, people. Please don't. Let's talk tournaments. Let's get to it and let's actually see.
You down with GPP?
Would you touch them in tournament?
I don't think so.
Not with the third highest ownership.
Not for me. Yeah, there's no way. I think that's a really tough sell for me.
Running back tournament or anybody that we haven't brought. I told you I was going to bring him up. I'll do it first. Kenyon Drake.
Yeah, too.
So Kenyon Drake destroys this team. First game ever played. Now you can have the counter argument and say off week for San Francisco, short week, didn't have time to plan for who Kenyon Drake was. Wasn't expecting Kenyon Drake to touch the ball that much with David Johnson back there. Now going into this game, for his price is still very low. The 49ers have been more vulnerable, but they're still not. Is there any way you're heading towards Drake?
No. I don't know. 5,400, like we just talked about how we have Josh Hill on the slate for some volume that we can project there. I had to scroll pretty far down to even get to Kenyon Drake on my sheet here. So really low total. San Francisco, not a defense I'm really just actively targeting. I don't know. Did you like what you saw from Kenyon Drake even last week? Like when DJ was in, I know DJ was really struggling, but Kenyon Drake didn't do a ton last week either, did he? I don't know. I didn't watch that game.
It wasn't that great, but I mean, it was better than anything was better than how David Johnson looked, which is sad.
He looks hurt, right? Like he's got to be hurt. Right?
If anybody hasn't seen the clip where he gets the ball and runs and then just walks to the offensive line and just basically stood there, I feel bad for him. I know you're a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. Anybody who's followed us know we are huge fans. I just shut him down for next year, please, because he's not going anywhere. The dead cap hit is like $12 million. He's on this team next year. Just shut the dude down. All right, so let me throw out a couple names. I'm going to throw out 3, and you tell me if you do like any of them for a tournament. We didn't bring up Devin Singletary and bounce back potential performance. The snap count was still there, 2/3 of the snaps, 66.7. Obviously, it's what we talked about last week, and I compared it to Matt Forte in his prime, is you worry about the vultures. So are you looking at Ezekiel Elliott against Detroit, who, if you want to pay up and get the pivot that nobody's taking right now, is Ezekiel Elliott and what has been, a subpar year for him? Or let's bring up another one you might want to pay for with an $800 price drop on DraftKings, a $500 price drop on FanDuel, Alvin Kamara. So I gave you one cheap and 2 studs.
So Singletary, he's $6K. It seems like, he at some point he's going to pop off. I think he's a really talented guy. He's someone that like has been seeing like enough work through the air that like this matchup against Miami, like even if you think that he's not going to get anywhere near some of these other guys in terms of his touches, like it wouldn't be surprising to see him have a really efficient game and kind of have a few big plays. So I think that's interesting. Kamara at 7,400. If this is the game where Kamara goes nuts, I'm probably not going to be there for it. I have a really hard time attacking Tampa Bay in that way. Like I don't care about matchups as much as most people, but I do care about the very drastic end of the spectrum. So targeting Tampa Bay, and again, they're good against the run, but they're also very strong at defending running backs in the passing game as well. So not so much on Kamara at that price tag. I think that getting up a little bit to any of these other guys at the top end to make more sense. But from a tournament spot, like you'll get him at the lowest ownership of any of those guys for sure. What was the last guy you mentioned?
It was Kamara, Singletary, and Ezekiel Elliott.
Oh, Zeke. Yeah, Zeke is a guy like I'm just kind of moving directly past in my head right now. Maybe that's kind of a mistake. Like he's someone that it's like the usage hasn't been like what we had kind of become accustomed to with that. But like I think that the passing game is going to be, like you said, Dak and Gallup. I don't know if that ends up being chalky. I'd be surprised. But the Zeke side of this is a game that I think is going to have a lot of plays. If you can get this Dallas and Detroit game right, I think that you'll be in a really good spot. So I think he's fine. But at that point, I think I prefer Dalvin Cook in that range, like by a pretty considerable margin. What's the ownership difference on Cook versus Elliott? Right
you had to do that right after I moved to wide receiver, didn't you? You did that perfectly timed. Dalvin Cook is 4th. Yeah. Zeke is 7th.
Okay. Interesting. I don't hate that. I still think that Dalvin Cook's the play, though.
12%, Zeke 8%. So.
Yeah. I mean, Cook's actually 12%. I thought he would have been higher than that. That's interesting.
It's still time. People are going to start, as you said, they listen to read a lot of stuff and things will move up. All right. Anybody before I ask you some wide receiver names?
No, that was pretty much it for me. What do you have on your mind, at least for wide receiver? We talked about a lot of guys I feel like at the top end. I think we talked about all of them at the top end. So who are some other guys you're kind of looking at?
Well, so all these guys I'm going to bring up because they're right now outside the top 35. So that's, thinking tournament wise there. So we already talked Kenny Golladay outside the top 35. If you kind of want to go to that game, I don't understand why he's that low. The Dallas defense started off amazing. It's still pretty strong, but it's not. I think a lot of that might be skewed from last week and how bad Stephon Diggs did in that entire game as a whole. But we talked about him. So let me go up 2 spots against Buffalo. Devontae Parker. Completely, people are just off him this week.
Yeah, people are off him.
Tre'Davious White
so
treatment.
He's 4,700. Yeah, that's the concern. That's kind of what I was. That would obviously make me want to go back to my boy Gesicki. But I mean, just looking at the numbers, like still Parker, like I get that some of the sample is when he did have Preston Williams there, but he's still sitting relatively strong in some of these opportunity metrics. So I think that he's probably a guy like on the cheaper end. If you landed on him at lower ownership, not the worst thing in the world, but again, at wide receiver, team total is massively important. Like you're not going to get that from Miami. So that's just like lowering the floor and probably lowering the ceiling as well. So at that same range, I was kind of expecting you to bring this guy up, but Mohamed Sanu at 5,100. Do you have any thoughts about him against Philly? Like I know you mentioned Edelman before, but I kind of like Sanu for sure.
For tournament wise, only because he's up inside the top 10. It's kind of, yeah.
Is he? Oh, I didn't realize he was that popular.
That's kind of why I was going to circle back for more of like, is he a better cash play? But I don't even like that because it's the Patriots. What if this is a Dorsett game? And I know Sanu and his usage, and part of the reason he was on the field so much with the Falcons is because he can block. But it's the Patriots. I go back to, I trust Julian Edelman, the end. And James White. That's about it. But I don't want James White just has such a capped ceiling outside one game this year that I don't really ever touch him in DFS.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Like they're tournament only because we still have no idea week to week like who's going to be the guy. Edelman's like the constant, like we know what his role is going to be. I guess on the other side of that game, do you have any interest in Alshon at 4,800? His opportunity has actually been relatively strong. Philly does have a pretty strong offensive line as well, so maybe they hold up New England's pass rush a little bit. He seems like he's just too cheap in that range for like a guy that does have a pretty massive role in that offense. So I don't hate him.
Zero.
Not for you. You hate Alshon.
No, I hate wide receiver blank facing Stephon Gilmore. That's what I hate. Like I know you.
See, that's stuff I don't pay as much attention to as you, because I don't think there's as much value in the wide receiver stuff. But again, the tails, if you think that that's someone that you would just completely avoid, like I'll kind of defer to you. Well, it's Gilmore,
and also Alshon Jeffrey missed practice, so he's not 100%. Even if he plays, he's not 100%. And I want Alshon Jeffrey 100% now. So when you say the matchup stuff, I don't go as far as like, oh, Jenkins has been, in the past he's been one of the best corners. He's been playing better of late. I'm not that scared. Marshawn Lattimore, he's kind of in that range where it might make me flip a coin. He's good enough. So I'm saying I agree with you generally because I think people can get way too caught up on that. But when you're talking about the 3 or 4 elites, and I would put White, as we just saw what he did to Odell Beckham with double-digit targets and still kept them in check. It wasn't a terrible game for Odell Beckham, but it wasn't a good one. And you talk about Gilmore, who Gilmore is just dominating. You throw out anybody and good names against him, and he's just shutting people down. And part of it's the defense he plays for, too. So that's why. But how about I'll throw 2 back at you. Against the 49ers, nobody is owning Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald this weekend. I think Larry Fitzgerald is completely off, period, right? Like, we just had his best game, and it wasn't even startable in DFS.
Yeah, I think if there's one guy on that side of the ball, it's Christian Kirk. I'm not going to Drake, not going to Fitz. Christian Kirk's my dude. 5,700 again. Like, if you're just looking at some of the stuff that really matters, if you look past the matchup, he's still a really interesting play. And like after you just had this massive game, he's going to be like sub 5% owned. Like, can you even I don't know what he's at right now, but I would be shocked if he's very high. So I think that's an interesting one. Let me ask you this though, like talking about a bad matchup, let's pivot to another. Yeah. So pivot to a guy that maybe the matchup's fine, but the quarterback situation. So Terry McLaurin at 5,600 from a tournament perspective, like this guy is so talented. He's facing the Jets who just can't defend the deep ball. What do you think about McLaurin 5,600, 5,500 on FanDuel is kind of what I was kind of zoned into. His price on FanDuel is pretty egregious.
So 100% with you until projected ownership. 9%, 8th on the board.
Really? Man, I'm like missing on ownership today. I guess it's early.
It's early. He is behind Chris Godwin, in front of Julian Edelman, Julio Jones, Sanu, Samuel, Dede, your boy Marquise Brown, Jamison Crowder on the other side of the ball. His projected ownership is almost double Jamison Crowder on the other side of the ball. It's just,
yeah, that's pretty crazy.
And I love, people know this, I love Dwayne Haskins. For 2020 and beyond, I thought Terry McLaurin was going to break out in 2020 when they started playing together. I was not expecting this, and I'm happy to see this. I'm a big Terry McLaurin fan too, but Dwayne Haskins is not ready right now, and no fault of his. He's very inexperienced coming from college, but that offensive line is going to do him no favors either. I'm 100, and I said that I'm 100% with you if Terry McLaurin was 2% owned. If he was down by the Will Fullers and Devontae Parkers and the Cortland Suttons and for the price that you're talking about, but you're going to put him inside the top 10? Nope.
Yeah, no chance. I was picturing him being much lower owned than that. So hopefully that's something that goes down throughout the week, but we need the savings. So I guess I'll kind of defer to the experts on the ownership when it comes to that, crazy. But we'll see.
Tight ends, any tournament plays for you?
Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to figure out how owned Greg Olson's going to be, but he's still the one that kind of pops to me. My boy Noah Fant at 3,700, terrible matchup against Minnesota. So if we're talking about tournaments, I don't think people are going to play Fant. Ridiculously low team total, like we mentioned with some of the other Denver guys, but still running a ton of routes, like has some ceiling. So I always want to mention him when it comes to tournament plays. I guess, do you think no one's going to play Jack Doyle because of what happened with Ebron? I don't hate the Ebron play either. Like 5,200 on FanDuel, 36 on DraftKings. Like, I guess I don't love that game in general. So I'm going to try and be underweight on that game overall. But for me, I think it's still some of the main guys we talked about, like Darren Waller in a pretty smash spot. And then I still think that Greg Olson at 3,900 is really interesting.
Eric Ebron's 5th. Jack Doyle's way down at 15th. So there you go. There's your easy pivot right there. I'm with you. I really have nothing more to really add to the tight end position.
I got one more guy if you really want to go off the board.
Ross Dwelly.
What do you think? 31. No. So I maybe I'm a little bit biased. I watched this entire game last week. Irv Smith,
Big Irv.
He's 3,100. Yeah, but like he had 6 targets in back-to-back weeks. Like the ceiling's probably not great, but he also has 2 red zone targets in back-to-back weeks. So he has a role. So I think he's interesting. Like played a decent amount of snaps last week too. Like the only reason I brought him up is because he's kind of right in that range with like Ebron, Goddard, Howard in terms of routes run. So I actually don't think that Irv Smith is terrible at 3,100. No. Like he's significantly cheaper than some of these other guys.
I'm a big fan of Big Irv. Anybody that knows, and selfish promotion here, which I do all the time, but over at The Athletic, I talk about it in the waiver columns because when Adam Thielen went down, I said he could essentially do what we were talking about with Noah Fant and George Kittle and all these tight ends, has become the number 2 receiver because that's really what he is. He's not that great of a blocker. He's in that Evan Ingram type of mold and all that type of stuff. So I'm with you. I don't mind the Big Irv call. Any quarterbacks before we talk stacks?
Yeah, who haven't we touched?
I
think that, again, we talked to... No, not for me.
Not even against Philly? Not even with like a 0 almost ownership?
He's too expensive, man.
That's why.
He's 6,200. I guess, in tournaments, if you hit on the right stack with Tom Brady, it could work out. I probably won't
right
be there
behind
for
him.
it.
What about Matt
I think
Ryan?
that it like... I don't know. Like, I think that... Those are 2 guys that I never play. So you would probably have a better take when it comes to Brady and Ryan. Like these guys don't run. Like I think the ceiling is there if they hit their 300 and 3 touchdowns, but if they don't, you're completely buried. And in a smaller field tournament that I'm playing, I don't take those type of chances. I guess if I'm going to take a chance, it's going to be for an extremely cheap guy that will run a little bit.
Is this smaller size tournaments or is this Kyle DFS Allen for the rest of us, Joe? Come on. The rest of us.
DFS for the rest of us. If you want to cheer for Tom Brady, knock yourself out.
If you're playing in the multi-$100,000, not 100,000 entries with all the rest of the people, not Tom Brady. I'll throw a Matt Ryan, Julio Jones stack together. You know that.
That's fair.
And Calvin Ridley. Yeah, Nobody wants Calvin Ridley either. I got so many questions. He's just in seasonal. Like, how do you have Calvin Ridley as the number 2, as a number 2 wide receiver? Like, who else is Matt Ryan throwing the ball to if they're throwing in this game?
I don't even like Calvin Ridley, but I think he's a really good buy low this week if people want to go that route. I mean, he's significant. If you have a team where you can't get to Julio and maybe you don't have Hill, like he's an interesting pivot.
All right, so I'll give you one more. Who's behind Ryan Finley and Jacoby Brissett and Jimmy Garoppolo in the same game? Kyler Murray, you're all over that for 1% ownership, aren't you?
I love Kyler, but this is a really tough spot to get there. But in tournaments, I mean, this is someone that I probably have a little bit of blinders for this kid, but I do think that anytime you get him at super low ownership, he has that ceiling potential to just break the slate. Like he could kind of approach some of these other guys we're mentioning, like Deshaun Watson, like Dak for a lot lower ownership, and you get a nice price discount with him too. Like there's really only a couple guys on the slate that you can kind of put in the same category when he's using his legs. So I like Kyler a decent amount. I haven't really considered him, but I think he's fine for tournaments.
So let's wrap things up. Some stack attack and lineups since we have no Chris.
Stack attack.
Stack attack. Oh, wait, but guess what, Chris? You're not here. We're doing it without you.
DFS Battle Royale.
Because I do have a mini stack in my DFS Battle Royale, and I will go first. I think it's kind of obvious. That's why. My 2 stacks, if I'm going towards them, is Dallas and Atlanta. That's where I'm going for stacks.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I think give me your team first. I want you to go first because I like to leverage off of your team if there's one spot that I'm still trying to fill in.
All right. You ready? So Dak at quarterback. I don't think you're going to have a lot of this. This might be the first one. You tell me when I'm done. I'm curious if you own one single player from this team. So actually you might, we'll see. Dak Prescott, Brian Hill, Joe Mixon. I'm waiting for that face. Julio Jones, Cortland Sutton, Michael Gallup, OJ Howard, Dalvin Cook, and the Redskins defense.
I own 2 players from your lineup.
That's more than I thought.
My spot, but actually probably not the ones you're thinking even. So
I guess
like the call with Dak.
Sutton and Redskins.
No, but I did consider Sutton very heavily. I went a slightly different route, but I did play the Redskins, so that's one of them. I'll give you one more guess on the last one. Nope, didn't play Brian Hill.
That's got to be. Go ahead.
All right, so my stack: Kyle Allen, Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and Greg Olsen.
Like it.
Going to bring it back with your boy Julio. So I'm like big time stacking up that Carolina game this week. But at the running back position, like I said, Christian McCaffrey. I'm gonna play Tevin Coleman this week in my lineup, and if it goes terribly wrong, I'm gonna blame you.
You know what the best part is? Right now, as of right now, I don't. Oh my god, I got a cramp. Hold on.
So, anyone that missed that just now, because I'm sure we're going to edit that part out, Jake literally got out of his chair because he got a hamstring cramp as I mentioned the name Tevin Coleman. So if that's not a reason to stay on this guy this week, I don't know what else is. But yeah, I am going to go Fournette as well. He seems like too cheap on FanDuel in particular. He's 7,200. So I like that. Terry McLaurin at wide receiver. So I actually, as far as the correlation goes, playing McLaurin and Washington defense probably wasn't the best, but I like the idea of McLaurin at 5,500 on FanDuel. It seems like extremely cheap for him. I think if you wanted to try and get up to Sutton, you could make a few things work in this team for sure. But I like the Julio bring back. You talked me into that one a little bit, so maybe that's one that I'll end up on at the end when all is said and done. But that main Carolina game stack is something that I really wanted to prioritize this week.
I love the fact that as of right now, you have Tevin Coleman and I don't. It might change by Sunday, but it's not the best. And so is a hamstring cramp. Oh, you know what? Before we get out of here, by the way, podcast 10% off. Get you into DFS Pass at Joe Holka, at Jake Ciely. No, not at Jake Ciely, at Olin Kidd. I don't even know what I'm talking about. That hamstring cramp has got me all screwed up. I did want to we didn't mention this guy at all, and you just made me think of it with Terry McLaurin. In a tournament, Darius Geis, first game back, I got to assume you can't touch that, right?
No chance. And if anyone wants to see me shake their head, definitely check that out on YouTube. I might leave in the hamstring pull on YouTube. If I do, that's where you'll find it.
How sad is that? Doing a podcast, a hamstring pull. I like you is a cramp.
I'll put it in slow-mo and everything.
Oh, this is going to be gold. It is gold. To make sure you're following both of us. Chris Meany too, at Chris Meany. He'll be back next week after his excursions and adventures and whatever the heck. I don't know. I don't know what he does. He just does way too many things. But as I said a million times, at Joe Holka on Instagram as well, at Olin Kidd on Instagram as well. Hopefully you do well in week 11, better than I do with my hamstring. Goodbye, everybody.
Good Lord.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.